All right, and it is May the 13th. Today's topic for Effective Virtual Conversations is about jazzing up engagement 2019 style. And as I prepared for today's call, I thought about, this is a topic we return back to regularly. And I think it is sort of the secret sauce of what makes a call memorable and really sticky. So these are some of the topics I've been talking about this winter and in recent months. I'm going to take us back to some of those calls, but for today, we're going to look at 6 different keys for engagement. And if you have a copy of Effective Virtual Conversations, which you can see at the top of the screen, do check out Chapter 6. That's really the chapter that deals with engagement. Today, we're going to be looking at breakouts, polls, annotation. I've got at least one group member here, so hopefully they will play along with me. And I want to link us to some past calls because this is really the tip of an iceberg. So a reminder, for example, 2 months ago, end of March 2019, the call was on boosting virtual retention and making it stick. And as we think about engagement, I think retention is one of the reasons why we want to do this. We really want to avoid the death by conference call. And for those of you that have a copy of Effective Virtual Conversations, you'll notice this from the front part of our book. If anything, it's getting worse. And I really think that in today's environment, whether we are working remote and virtual or whether we're working with as part of an intact team, many times we're coming onto virtual calls ready to just listen very passively, as we may have 1, 2, or even 3 devices going. And when I say 3 devices, you might have your main desktop, you may be connecting into Zoom or WebEx on another one, and you might be having your mobile app on the go as well. So today's call is all about how do we continue to create meaningful, valuable calls by using different engagement points. And I'd like to just invite you to think for a moment about what does engagement mean for you? Does it mean creating a captivating call? Does it mean incorporating more video? Does it mean just making things a little bit different? So while we get going, and I'll invite our one group member today, Danette, to just chat away with me if you'd like. Really today, I'd like to just get your eyes opening around what engagement means, what are the things that are possible in your world, because it can be very, very easy. And we can do little things that have great impact. So on the same topic, just about 4 or 5 days ago, my May 2019 article came out for the Coaching Tools Company. It's a company that I offer. I'm a guest author for several different newsletters that they publish. And this month's newsletter was on 8 ways for you to create a wow virtual group call. So I'm not tapping into that because this was just published, but you do want to check out that. You can Google Coaching Tools Company, and my article was called 8 ways for you to create a wow virtual group. What I want to zoom into are those Chapter 6 topic ideas. And the first one that I shared more than 2 years ago was the notion of first impressions. We have just a short window to make a positive first impression. So how are you capturing people's attention? Are you showing a video? Are you throwing out a question like I did today? What's important about this topic for you? Are you maybe showing a different type of graphic? Either one that is really captivating, or perhaps one like you can see on the screen, a little bit more focused on icons. And if any of you have done any work with me, whether it's in a train-to-trainer program or being a participant in a virtual session, many times I like to incorporate icons. Icons are a fantastic sort of multicultural lens. We don't need to be speaking the same first language, but they can create a focus point. So I've got Danette on the line. I want to just ask Danette, while you're here with me, turn to annotation if you could. And annotation is available. It's a different option, but it's an option available to most people on different platforms. Danette, if you'll play along with me, I'd like you to grab your pen and to circle the icon that represents what is the first impression you'd like to make in an upcoming virtual session you have planned. So this, you could do this whether you're here live or not, but zoom into those icons, everyone. If you're here with me, circle what is the icon that you want to use to really anchor what you want to create in your program. And so I'm going to do this as well. I'm going to grab my pen. I'm going to circle an icon here. I've done the cog on the wheel. And for me, part of, group programming, part of virtual programming is helping people not only notice who they are, but how they fit in together. And I think this creates an even more wow opportunity. So Danette, you can choose to say something. I'd love it if you did, but what does the graphic you've chosen represent? I see you've got the sort of like a person with their team. What does that represent for you?
I really want to see the multiplication of whatever we're doing to ripple out. I don't want it to stop with the people on the call. So that's why I chose that graphic.
Yeah. And, multiplication factor is so key. In all of this work, we want to bring our folks into the room and be able to really draw them in so many different ways. And asking them, what's important for you? That's a great question. But for many others, having an icon like this may just be the one thing that moves them into more action. And just like that, the death by conference call person that you saw a few cartoons ago, we want to really bring people into the call and provide a bit of a journey map. So tip number 2 is to be really thinking about that journey, particularly the start and the end. And like this graphic shows, it's often those 2 points, the start and the end, that are the things that get retained. So are you creating a roadmap for people to understand, here's where we're starting, this is where we're ending. Along the way, we're going to go to A, B, C. Another thing we might be considering is how are we using that front end and back end, or the start and end, as an opportunity to really lock in learning or reinforce key messages. These are small things, but I think they're things that often in the heat of the moment, virtual facilitators forget about them. So even simply doing things like at the end of the call, are you recapping the journey? Are you getting the group to recap where you went along the overall time you were together? So that's tip number 2. Again, engagement strategies. Think about your start, your end, your journey map. As the facilitator, you'll also want to think about what are those points at which you create engagement. And everyone is going to have a different pacing on this, but at minimum, we will want to bring people into the room more actively about every 7 to 10 minutes. For some virtual facilitators, that might be even quicker. It could be every 3 to 5 minutes. How do you engage people in the room? It could be using annotation like we just did. It could be using chat. So start and end, think about that. And as a subset of this, think about what are those interaction or engagement points as you go. Last month, if you weren't with me in the April 2019 call, I talked about the sticky factor and how do we create more learning impact. I shared with those on the call last month about Ebbinghaus, and Ebbinghaus wrote in the 1950s, I believe, on what was commonly known now as the forgetting curve. As you can see here with the graphic, what we retain or what we forget really is impacted by a number of different things. It can be impacted by what's meaningful to us, the way it's represented, as well as different physiological factors such as stress, sleep, time of day. Think about what you've retained from the start of our call. We've been on the call now for about 6-7 minutes. Are you remembering things like the roadmap or, oh, that cool icon thing? Or for some of you, you might be thinking about that cartoon I showed right at the start of the call. As designers, as facilitators, as coaches, we really want to be thinking about how do we add graphic variety to support this notion of not only the start and the end, but also thinking about how do we retain things. This takes us to number 3, which is making sure we build our toolkit. Engagement is all about having a variety of different activities. And for those of you that have a copy of Effective Virtual Conversations, check out Chapter 7. This is a graphic taken from Chapter 7 where I cover 24 different ways to really bring people into the room. So you'll notice here from everything from photographs to using maps to using scenarios and animation. This week on my Effective Virtual Conversations tip, my tip of the day is go east to west and use maps. Many times we're with groups, but we don't give the groups an opportunity to say, hey, I'm calling in from so-and-so. I think there is a way to provide privacy for people, but also to help people notice where they're calling in from. And if you work with a global group, maybe you just have a map of the globe that you have copyright access to and get people to dot where they're calling in from. On other calls, you may just get them to use chat. Or in some groups, if you know that it's a certain geographic catchment area, bring a map and get people to actually dot where they're at. And then as you check in and check out or involve people, go east to west or west to east. Or for me, a lot of the time, it's time zones. We'll start with the person who's latest in the day and work our ways to the person who is earliest in the day. So there's a lot that we could be drawing upon. Again, now that these calls are almost 2 years in length, there's a lot of different calls you can pull on as it relates to activities. Also, if you have a copy of the book, don't forget that each chapter has a digital download. You'll find the reference of where to go with that in your introduction of the book. So if you haven't picked up your copy of Effective Virtual Conversations for a while, this is just a reminder, like pull it out. This focus for activities, Chapter 7, and make sure that you go over to the related website to download the activities worksheet. It looks like this. So as you're reading through the chapter, take note of things. Some of the ones that I really like to use, of course, is chats, paired partners. I go into talking about using polls, breakouts, emojis, all these different things. So what techniques you want to use? In an earlier call, I talked about using openers and closers, and I've touched on that today as well. Why I stress that so much is that our brain tends to remember what is first and what is last. That's known as the recency and primacy effects. And we do want to really leverage that. We can also be using other approaches like getting people to solve real-time problems in our work. And for those of you that come to this work with a coaching lens, I think this is probably one of the greatest things, one of the greatest gifts we can give. Getting people to bring their greatest opportunity or their greatest challenge. Another area you might be thinking about is reflection. And in fact, I had a call late last week from someone who had found me on the web through YouTube. And the first recording that they listened to was a quarterly reflection prompts. This isn't related to Effective Virtual Conversations, but it's related to my later work around coaching business development. And one of the things I've been hosting regularly for many years now, but doing a lot more of today, is quarterly reflection prompts, where for the course of half an hour or an hour, it's a pause point. A pause to come, relax, sit down, and actually stop and reflect on what's working and what's not. In my quarterly reflection prompts, we go through a series of questions for a 45-minute period. And I think people are really amazed at how much insight they can glean in that short pause. So think about what you're doing right now. Probably you're doing quite a few of these things already, but what's one thing you might be able to incorporate more of for your own clients? I think we often get in our own rut, right? And if you're new to this work, there's a lot of options, but if you've been doing virtual work for a while, I think we just turn to the same tools time and time again. So think about a new technique or a new approach you could be using. Now, another download for those that have a copy of Effective Virtual Conversations is be sure to download the 6 keys for engagement. That's what we're looking at today. We've covered already first impressions, start and end, and activities for engagement. Notice we're halfway through the call, and I strategically, from a design standpoint, put this slide here. Going back to our notion of the roadmap and the start and end, at the midpoint of your calls, you're going to want to revisit where have you been, So as I've said here, we've done first impressions, start and end, activities for engagement. And where we're going in the next 15 minutes is we'll be looking at a couple more tips. So with that, let's go to number 4. Number 4 is hearing from more than you. And I think it's a little disconcerting for some facilitators as they step into the virtual space. They might be really like thinking, I'm speaking into this abyss, or some call it the black hole. I really like thinking of it more as the abyss. As virtual facilitators, there are other people on the line. So it's just an invite and a reminder to hear from people that are more than you. Already we've heard from Danette, and I'm going to call on you, Danette, again, just to give a little bit of variety, right? If you're listening to the same person go on and on, we can only do so much around inflection in our voice. So Danette, I know you're an active virtual facilitator. What's your biggest stretch point right now? Let's hear about something you're learning about or you are growing in. Is there a stretch point you'd be able to share with us in service of learning?
I really like to use pictures, the share my screen.
Yeah.
But like my call on Friday, I know. And so I've got to stretch and figure out, well, how do I engage these people who aren't going to see the screen? So that's been a trick recently for this group.
Yeah. Well, I have a slide coming up, and you're speaking to blended learning environments, right? Or the blended environment where we may have some people that can see a screen and others who can't. And a quick tip, again, there's sort of part of our work is about creating equity across a group. Always remember that for those that can see the screen, there's more interaction opportunities. If someone's calling in by phone, which they might for a variety of reasons, they may feel that they're at a bit of a disadvantage. So call on those folk first. You might invite them rather than pointing to a photo, thinking about an image that represents X, Y, or Z, depending on whatever you're looking at, whatever topic you're looking at. And if you're regularly noticing that there's a blended environment, really be thinking about, is there something pre-call you can be sending out? So if you do want to use photographs, would it add value? The question is would it add value for me to send out those photographs in a one-page PDF before we get on the call so that people who are calling in as well as streaming in can see the same information together? And that way we have, a really engaged conversation. But it's not always feasible. Sometimes we just don't know who's going to be with us, so we do want to call on them in the moment. Bring them into the room, right? The brain is hardwired to forget. And really with any training, as training industry wrote in a recent article, Todd Maddox wrote, retention is a true goal of training. And if it's just you speaking, you're not going to remember it as much. So number 5, going to my 5th tip around engagement from the book, Effective Virtual Conversations, my 5th tip was about involving others, having some level of peer interaction. And as I look out now at almost 2 years of these calls, I can see the statistics on what calls have been most popular. One of the most popular calls for Effective Virtual Conversations comes from October 2017. It's called Breakouts That Sizzle. And if you haven't had a chance to review that recording, it goes into 30 minutes of tips on things you want to keep in mind as you involve and invoke the peer conversation. As you can see with our graphic here, we've got 2 people, 2 peers, two guys talking together. We've got different combinations. First of all, they're face-to-face and they're having a discussion. The second one, we have one person in the room, the other person sort of like on a Skype or a Zoom streaming. Then in the last iteration, we have the 2 people both streaming and talking to each other in sort of the virtual space. Breakouts are a great way to deepen the conversation. In an interactive virtual call, we often may want to leave, time for us to speak as a facilitator. And I think sometimes that's great, but there may be real opportunity to put people into that smaller breakout space. So to the lower right graphic, it really is feasible on so many of the platforms, from Zoom to WebEx, to have these smaller breakout rooms. As I share in the breakouts at Sizzle Call, things you want to keep in mind is, of course, the interactivity and the peer learning factor. You want to make sure that you give enough time. And often we'll just say, oh, I'll put you into breakout for 3 minutes. 3 minutes may not be enough time. So really, practice the best practice of less is more. And if you think about that roadmap graphic I shared 5 or 10 minutes ago, really be intentional with the different interaction touch points. Maybe you want to incorporate breakouts, and if you only have 30 minutes for the call, think about how much time you can dedicate to that. Instead of providing people with 2 questions and sending them out for 10 minutes, you might just get them to be in dialogue around 1 question with 1 other peer. So breakouts are a fantastic way. Again, there's the October 2017 call called Breakouts at Sizzle. I think you can probably just Google that title now and it will take you into my YouTube presentation of the same topic. So in addition to breakouts, we can also use annotation. And I've got a quick photo of a call I recently did where we were talking more at depth around what I call the 6 factors of high-performing teams. I was really curious in my breakout room to hear, like, what are the things my colleague was using? And so just notice that on some platforms you can do breakouts and you can still do annotation. Annotation is a second sort of interaction stream that I think many of us don't utilize. And just as we've done today, we started the call, I asked Danette or others to think about the icon that is representative. Sometimes it can be useful to put something on the screen and real time we can work on it. So what you can see here is the virtual and remote wheel I created for my recent book, PlanDoTrack. And it is a pretty standard coaching tool. I've iterated it for the virtual and remote space. And this is a tool where I get people to rate themselves on a 1 to 10. Where are you, for example, as a remote worker in terms of your administrative tasks? When I coach a lot of virtual remote workers, this is one of the biggest pain points. How do I systematize my work? How do I make sure that I'm getting receipts? Because they are located far away from the others that they're working with. So just a reminder that you can use annotation, and whether you're getting people to shade it in on the screen, you can always take a screenshot so that you can save it. That's this little button over here to the right. And the nice thing when you're using a platform like Zoom is it's sent to you after the call. So for yourself, think about annotation. And the third tool I like to use is polls. So the poll you see here is a little different than the one you'd see if you were in Zoom, but you could use this on a related social platform. As some of you know, recently, earlier this year, I started something called the Conversation Sparker Zone, which is really a private community you can join. Hope you will join us and really be in dialogue around different issues. So there's a stream for facilitators, there's a stream for virtual professionals and entrepreneurs. And what I've just taken is a screen grab of one of the poll questions I put out. What's your biggest challenge as a virtual professional or entrepreneur? Is it getting things done, getting organized? Is it matrix team management? Is it letting others know what I do or what I have to offer? Or is it something else? And so polls are a great way to help boost, not only interaction before a call, but also to give you some idea of who's in the group and what is really of top of mind importance. So lots of poll options available pre-call, from SurveyMonkey to this, platform where I've just created it in our community environment, which is Mighty Networks. I think you can do polls now in Facebook, on Instagram. So pre-call, lots of options. And then, of course, when you're in polls, many of our virtual platforms, WebEx and Zoom, allow you to create polls on the go. So think through how you might use a poll to get people to vote. during a call. And polls is a great option for interaction if you're in a larger call. So I use polls a lot rather than breakouts or chat if I have more than 20 or 50 people on the line. Really, polls is a great one for those larger groups. So think about that. All right, so we're almost at the end with number 6. Number 6 thinking or key to engagement is getting people to really be able to apply it to their work and their life. And many of you, if you've heard me speak before, I have a real affinity as a coach to something I call the one-page plan. It's really the one page where people can write out their goal. As you can see here, the description of the goal, key timelines, resources they need, enablers and derailers. And this to me is what helps translate learning into the real workplace or life. If we're not tracking it, many things are happening and we're not noticing what is getting stuck, what is not getting stuck. So in your work, is there a way to just quickly pause and ask people what's next? How will you apply this? Or what have you been doing to apply this so far? When there's more time, don't forget you can have do it nows. And some of you really love the afternoon sessions that I host, the Get It Done days, the afternoon virtual retreats. I think another way to support that linkage between what we're talking about here and real life is around breakouts. Get people in their breakouts to talk about how will you apply this. The third way, of course, is doing an actual virtual retreat. So with that, lots to think about. We've already touched on this notion of the blended environment. I'm glad that for us, because increasingly you may have environments like you can see here on the right. A few people with you in the room, and then another half of the group in the virtual space. This has implications for design. This has implications for interactivity. I think I'll dedicate a future call to how do we really work with blended environments, because it's everyone's sort of focus. Other calls you might want to check out, breakouts at Sizzle. I mentioned that quite a bit. That's our October 2017 call. And last September 2018, another call called More About Engagement. I'd love for you right now, as I start to wrap up the call, think about how you want to map it out. What are your next steps, whether it's 1, 2, or even 5 things? What is one thing you could be taking from our call today? And it's really key that every time we really note these down in a place that we can refer to. I've mentioned that we're keeping the conversation going over in the Conversation Sparker Zone. If you're interested in joining the conversation there, please do so. There's a whole section on virtual conversations. You can jump into one or all of these different groups. But I do have every week or 2 weeks put out either a resource or a question or something that will help you keep the focus. Part of my current sort of vendetta is to really also be getting people thinking about tracking their steps. So that's nothing new. Effective virtual conversations, just a reminder, at the back of the book in Appendix B, you've got your action plan tracker. Today we've been talking about chapters 6 and 7. So before you leave this recording, bullet out for yourself some of the key learning that you had around engagement, chapter 6, or activities, which is chapter 7. If you have a copy of my more recent work, Coaching Business Builder and PlanDoTrack, maybe take a note in your monthly daily tracker around something you want to really be noticing around engagement. If you're running virtual calls, how many times in the month are you hosting virtual calls? The monthly daily tracker is really geared for you to have a visual of what your entire month looks like. That could include what you're doing, what you're learning, what revenue is coming in the door, how many people you're working with, how many times you're communicating what you're doing. So track it. There's a lot that can be said about tracking your data. I'm continuing to enjoy, as I said a few minutes ago, holding the space for learning. Coming up later this month on the 30th of the month, I'll be hosting my next PlanDoTrack virtual retreat. That is a paid program. And over 4 hours, we really get into some specific activities to help you with your vision for your work, as well as where you want to go. It's more about PlanDoTrack virtual retreat over at Coaching Business Builder. Also, just a shout out on June the 3rd, Monday afternoon, 1:30 to 2:45 Eastern, I'll be hosting the next Virtual Facilitation Essentials. That's a 5-week teleclass where we take a deep dive into many of these practices we've been looking at today. The course now is approved for CCEs, so it is worth 8.5 hours of CCEs. And there's other programming on the go. I want to say a big thank you for joining me every Monday, EVC tips over at the Teams 365 blog. So there's a lot on the go right now in terms of keeping things going. I want to say thanks to you, Danette, and given that you're live with me, what's one learning you're going to be able to put into practice in your virtual work as you move forward this month?
I'm going to create a pre-send PDF for the group that's going to meet on Friday and send it with a reminder.
All right, love that. And, you know, it's a good reminder that we can't always fit everything into one call. So just as I've also tried to model today, how can you let people know where to go with other supports and other things you offer? All right, Danette, thanks for joining me. And I'll look forward to hosting our next call next month. I'm just about to publish the call schedule for the rest of the month. We've got very fun topics coming up. We're going to continue on our focus on some team tools. We're also going to be looking at how can you keep conversations going in between calls. The calls will remain on a Monday from 11 to 11:30. They are going to happen on different weeks of the month, just given my own schedule for the next few months. So stay tuned. I try to post these every time, every month, over at our Effective Group Coaching Facebook page and also in the newsletter, which will be going out next week. All right, Jeanette, have a great week, and thanks for joining us today. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Jeanette. See ya.
Enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye.